Hey guys, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome to the next session of Out of Box with ABK. Today, मैं खुद तो नहीं बोलूँगा. I am not going to speak. We have one of the greats of Disciplined Agile with us today, Joshua Barnes. इनके बारे में बताना तो it's just like कि हम सूरज को रोशनी दिखाने की कोशिश कर रहे हैं. Joshua Barnes is founder of Process Mentors. He's a PMIDA adoption partner. He's one of the first 6 guys I think जो जिन्होंने Disciplined Agile पे काम करना शुरू किया. और he's one of the leading instructors of Disciplined Agile. He's been in enterprise agility for last 17, 18 years. Over 25 years of experience in project management. And there's so many things, but I know that you guys don't want to hear me, don't want to look at my face. You want to listen to the great man himself. Let me bring him up. Hey Joshua, how are you, man?
Good. How are you doing? Thank you for the wonderful introduction.
Yeah, and our audiences are dying to hear from you. So I'm going back, and I think you can take it forward.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Hello, everyone. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here and be able to provide a bit of an overview of Disciplined Agile, as well as what I feel in my experience, some of the key differentiators are with using Disciplined Agile as a toolkit. So I'm going to go into sharing my screen. I have some slides to begin and show. And what I'd like to start off with is just a little bit of an expansion. So yes, I have been using Disciplined Agile since its original origin. I currently have all of the Disciplined Agile certifications, and one of the things that I get a really good opportunity to do is I'm one of the only Disciplined Agile instructor trainers. So I get the chance to work with instructor candidates to be able to bring the good workshops and the certifications across the world. So that's something that I feel very strongly about helping to build the DA community. In addition to the training that I do, I am the founder of Process Mentors. We do a lot of assessments, agility, health checks, a lot of training, and a lot of coaching. So I balance what I bring to the workshops and what I'm going to bring to you today in this webinar with the actual coaching experience that I have, which is the primary focus with the work that I do. So the agenda that I'm going to cover today is what is Disciplined Agile, just give you a very high level overview of what it is, some context of these differentiators that I feel very strongly about, a lot of questions that I get asked, whether it's from organizations, individuals that are interested in learning a bit more about DA, lifecycle options, a role called the architect owner, what a process goal is, and finally, a little bit on the career paths and certifications that Disciplined Agile have within it. So what can Disciplined Agile help us with to accomplish? So one of the things, like a lot of the Agile frameworks that are recognized out in the industry, is optimizing Agile teams. How can we take an approach that provides us an opportunity to deliver value sooner using Agile principles, balanced also with lean principles, things like looking towards optimizing what we're doing on the whole versus more of a localized or focused optimization, looking at batching our work smaller so we can deliver that value quicker and be able to get validated feedback and make much more informed decisions over time. Another thing is extending agility beyond teams to the entire organization. So Disciplined Agile's origins started off in the delivery space, which was for teams to be more effective, but then it grew to have more guidance in DevOps at the value stream level as well as the enterprise level. So DA has content and guidance to support not only what's needed for the various departments and in areas in the organizations we work in to be able to enable the teams to deliver Agile or deliver their value in an Agile way of working, but also how those departments that are not doing software development can take an Agile way of working for the work that they do. And finally, accelerating value delivery in scaled Agile situations. So one of the differentiators that I'm going to cover is Disciplined Agile has multiple life cycles, and one of them is a scaled approach. It's called our program life cycle that is able to organize teams of teams in ways that are very different than what a lot of the other approaches to scaling in the industry focus on. So first, I will give just a little bit of background on DA. So Disciplined Agile became part of the PMI family in August of 2019. So PMI purchased the Disciplined Agile Consortium, and at the same time, it purchased another organization called Net Objectives that had more of a focus on lean principles, value stream management, investment decisions at the portfolio level that then fed really nicely into what was already within Disciplined Agile. And we're really starting to see the benefits of those two bodies of knowledge come together, as well as some of the additional information and content and guidance that's coming from other areas that were already within PMI. So a bit of a definition of DA: provides guidance to help organizations choose their way of working in a context-sensitive manner, providing a solid foundation for business agility. So what that means is that we have an opportunity with DA for teams to choose their own way of working, to create an instance of Disciplined Agile's options that are specifically fit for their context, the type of team, the type of product that they're supporting, the product within a product line, the product line within the organization, the value stream that their product may be supporting, or value streams that it may be supporting, and so on. In addition to that, Disciplined Agile is a toolkit of Agile strategies and practices that are going to complement any other Agile framework or methods, such as Scrum or SAFe or large-scale Scrum or Nexus from scrum.org and so forth. There are ways that we can make improvements if you are on a team or you are already at an organization that has made an investment in another Agile approach. And in addition to that, Disciplined Agile can be used as a beginning way to move into an Agile way of working. So it provides quite a bit of opportunity. So where we're at the current state in the industry is Agile has devolved into a bit of chaos. I mean, there's hundreds and hundreds of practices that you can find within the Agile and Lean principle space. And then in addition to these practices, there are techniques for teams to have different ways to accomplish the value that these practices are going to be able to potentially provide to them. There's a lot of significant overlap. There are significant gaps. There's a lot of conflicting advice. Some of the frameworks change some of the terminology a bit intentionally so that they can have a bit of a differentiation. Lots of niche certifications. There are certifications that are quite easy to get versus some of the ones that are much more challenging to get. And that's one of the things that was an impetus for PMI to purchase Disciplined Agile. Disciplined Agile has a way to be able to provide essentially containers, or what we call process blades, for all of this type of information, which I'll show you a little bit later in this webinar. But it's a succinct way to be able to make some decisions based on the context that you as a team are facing. Something else that we're seeing is, frameworks aren't silver bullets. You can't just adopt an Agile way of working overnight. We can't just reboot an organization over a weekend and we move all of the projects or the product development from whatever the current way of working is to an Agile way of working. And what if your staff aren't sufficiently skilled, right? A lot of times we find in organizations that are beginning to take an Agile way of working, especially if it's more of a sort of a grassroots effort, it's very challenging for teams to be able to figure this out on their own if there's a very limited body of knowledge that they're using. And what if the prescriptive advice doesn't suit your organization's context? So a lot of the existing Agile frameworks, and I'll use Scrum as an example, and I've done a lot of work with Scrum. I've got multiple certifications in Scrum. Scrum is a very good option for a lot of teams and a lot of organizations. But it's not always the right fit. And there are a lot of times where we can go beyond or extend Scrum's construction focus to be able to use other approaches to delivering value quicker and quicker. And the last point I'll touch on is, don't you need to do better than simply copying somebody else's approach? And that's what we have with this prescriptive nature of some of these frameworks. There is a one way to do it. If you're not following the Scrum Guide, then according to scrum.org and being sort of in the what they consider professional Scrum space, you're really no longer doing Scrum. And so we're kind of copying one approach and applying it unilaterally across all teams. And some of those teams might become very successful and produce very good value with that, but other teams might not. So for example, when we're looking to change our any way of working, but specifically to an agile way of working, and I'll use Scrum as an example, I mean, we normally are going to see a little bit of a dip in our effectiveness, right? We have this initial learning curve. We might be in training. We might be receiving hopefully some coaching. We're figuring out how to change over to this new way of working. But then over time, we should expect that our effectiveness increases over where we started. So either if we're moving from a traditional approach, whether we want to call it waterfall or predictive or traditional, and if we're maybe using more of an ad hoc, a pseudo agile approach, sometimes called Scrum Fall or Wagile or Scrum, but right, we're doing Scrum, but we're not really delivering anything within a particular sprint or a given time box. So even when we are on the Scrum Guide, it's a rather small container of information. The Scrum Guide's roughly 17 pages long, very stable, very succinct in a lot of ways. So we can see that we can become much more effective when using it. But a lot of studies that have been done, this is one that every few years comes out. The last one, 2017, 1,500 plus teams at 150 different organizations. A 7 to 12% more productive on average response is what was being found. And what I personally find at organizations that have used Scrum is that the teams do get to a point where they're starting to explore things outside of the Scrum Guide. And at that point, they're beginning to embark on continuous improvement. And a lot of times they're just trying different practices. Maybe somebody watched a webinar like this, went to a conference, somebody new came into the organization and joined the team and is bringing some additional experience. And what we find there is we're going to be able to make some improvements. And this is one of the ways that Disciplined Agile really provides a lot of value. So the goal is that we start with wherever we are. We don't have to have some ideal state to start making progress. And then we do the best that we can in our given situation, but we're always trying to figure out and measure how we're getting better. So the red line, again, is meant to indicate that with a prescriptive framework, you're going to get to a plateau at some point, whether you're getting to be much more effective than what's showing on this, because this is averaged over a lot of projects and a lot of different organizations, or even maybe a little bit less. The dashed line, continuous improvement, again, is where we might be seeking out other things, other ways that we feel we're going to be able to do something better. We're going to experiment a bit with a new practice or look to a different life cycle possibly. And the solid line is meant to represent guided continuous improvement. And the guided part comes from the body of knowledge that we have with Disciplined Agile. And I can't go into an enormous amount of depth with this because obviously in a short webinar like this, it's not easy, but we do have a wealth of information within Disciplined Agile that helps to support this guided approach, whether you have a lot of experience coaching that's available to you as a team or as an organization or not. So some of the questions that I often get asked: what are the differentiators of Disciplined Agile? How is Disciplined Agile different? What makes Disciplined Agile different? Is there really a difference between Disciplined Agile and Scrum? And I really like this last one. If we're already doing some Agile approach, why would we want to switch? right? I get asked this from students that come to workshops, Agile team members at organizations that I'm either doing an assessment for or supporting, senior executives, people from leadership team, managers, project managers, Agile coaches, colleagues that I come across in the industry. And that's one of the messages that I really wanted to bring to this group. And I'm assuming that since you're here, you must be asking the same question or being asked this question. So one of the most significant differentiators with respect to Disciplined Agile, and where I find it really adds a lot of just the value to teams and organizations, is that there are multiple life cycles that teams can choose from. So again, a lot of times I'll mention this and the question comes up, we have a choice in the life cycle we can select to use. I mean, if we've been using Scrum, we're going to be using the Scrum life cycle or the Scrum approach to a construction focus. Or if we're using something like a scaled approach, which are typically going to be using Scrum as their backbone or their foundation, they might not realize that there are other life cycles and other approaches they can use. So the answer to that is yes, definitely. So Disciplined Agile has multiple life cycles. I'm going to just briefly touch on these 7, although there are some additional life cycles that are coming. So the lighter blue colored hexagons represent what we consider to be our team-based life cycles. So we have an exploratory one. This is one that is very good for testing a hypothesis, something that if we're looking to determine what type of an MVP we need to produce to see if we can productize or monetize something, trying to figure out which direction to go from an architectural standpoint. Are we going to look to bring in one technology into our stack versus another? This is a very good, very simple life cycle that helps to support that. We have an Agile life cycle. So the Agile life cycle extends Scrum. So at its origin, in what we have in the center phase, which is called construction, is very, very similar to what we'd see when we use Scrum. It just brings some of the other areas that can add value. We have a continuous delivery version of that, where we're able to still batch up work. So we were going to be batching up work into an iteration, which is the same thing as a sprint. So a very small time box. So every 1 to 2 weeks, we'll have a certain quantity of work that the team has agreed to do. And then at the end of that iteration, they will deploy that into their production environment, and they'll move on to the next small batch of work. We have a lean life cycle, very similar to the Agile life cycle. One of the big differences that I'm going to touch on here is that this is very much like Scrumban. We are no longer using a time box construct. We're not using an iteration, or we're not using a sprint. It's where the teams are just pulling work off of the stack. So it's a continuous flow of delivering the scope of work they've committed to doing. And then we have a continuous delivery version of that as well. This is where we're typically going to see where a story or maybe a handful of stories are going to be worked on. And as soon as they meet a definition of done and they're ready to be deployed, they're going to be deployed into your production environment. In addition to that, we have a program lifecycle. So again, this is for scaling. This is where we have teams of teams. We have a quantity of work, a size of scope that goes beyond what one team could produce within a time frame that we want to get that into the hands of our users, our customers. And so we do have a program life cycle for doing that. And then finally, the life cycle in the middle, the one that is this sort of deeper purple color, is called the flex life cycle. And this is focused on value stream management, how to improve value streams, how to make investment decisions at the portfolio level that feed work into the teams that are using the outer life cycles that I just described. So the best way that I can describe how valuable this is to just use a real scenario. So I want to use some context from one of the teams that I worked with in the past. So it was a team new to Agile. Some team members were new to each other. A couple of the team members did have experience with Scrum. The scope implement a new business capability. So this was at a company that it'd been in business for decades, but their whole focus was on wholesaling their products. New leadership came in. The time was right for them to not try and venture to have sort of brick and mortar, like permanent physical locations to sell their products, but to actually start selling their products direct to consumer using a new web portal. So a very established, very large company, but newly into providing something as a way for individuals to buy their products. So and why I like this as an example is most everyone can relate to this. So these are some of the things that are within a container we call an MBI, a minimum business increment. It's the next quantity of work that needs to be produced to be able to deliver value from a sufficient functionality standpoint to our customers. So as in the MBIs, these feature level statements is higher levels of scope that represent these business processes. Here I have them represented the way the teams did it, which was very similar to a user story. So they're almost kind of like a super big epic. So as a customer, I want to be able to set up an account so I don't have to fill out purchase information with every purchase. As a customer, I want to be able to select a product so that I can purchase it. So there's some functionality that our customers would be interacting with, as well as how to get the information for those customers to be able to see our products. So a content manager role, and then as a brand manager, how we're going to be able to analyze promotions and actually start to raise the awareness out in the world that we actually have a way for people to buy our products now directly from us. So the sizing of this work was 4 to 5 months, and this was actually something that was pared down because we had a very significant focus on trying to batch the work up small enough so we could get something out and see how the customers were actually interacting with it. Should we continue to invest in this? Should we continue to invest in some of the functionality that we were creating? So now take a look at some of the options we have from a DA perspective. So the Agile life cycle. So this extends Scrum's construction focus. Uses time boxes, right? So we have iterations. That's sort of that center part there that, we have the same kind of circle that shows an iteration versus a sprint. We have our daily work. We have what's called a daily coordination meeting, which is very similar to a daily Scrum. And again, this is a very Scrum-like approach. The main differences, though, is we have an underlying governance structure, a very lightweight, very lean approach to governance so that we can make sure that the teams are moving and traversing across this life cycle in a very positive way. So we have 3 phases: the inception phase, the construction phase, and the transition phase. And what that really boils down to is we're going to do a little bit of upfront work from a planning perspective. We're going to get a good understanding of the amount of scope we're getting ready to commit to, and we're going to get that agreement with our stakeholders, right? So we're going to be able to set expectations, and then we're going to be able to manage those expectations. This is very, very similar to when teams are doing a sprint 0 using Scrum. Then we get into construction. We're going to make sure that we have a risk value approach. So we're going to balance the amount of value from a business perspective we're working on early in the life cycle with mitigation of risk. So we have a proven architecture milestone that is represented very early in our construction phase. We're going to continue to make sure we're going in the right direction, continued viability, all the way until we hit the minimum functionality required to add value to our customers. And then we're going to get into what we need to do from a production readiness standpoint. So we have these lightweight milestones, and this is often a good starting point for teams new to an agile way of working. This is most often the life cycle that I will have teams start with, regardless of their level of experience, because we can move from this life cycle with a little bit of overhead to one of the others if it's appropriate and if it's going to add value and we're going to be more efficient. So the other life cycle, which is a lot like Scrum, is the lean life cycle. And so it supports a continuous flow of development. It has the same 3 phases. It has the same lightweight milestones. The big difference here is it removes sort of the guardrails or the bit of guidance that these iterations and the recurring events within an iteration provide to teams that are new to Agile. So it doesn't use time boxes. It's just a continuous flow of work. Just like we'd get out of iteration planning and the teams would be pulling work from their iteration backlog, and very similar to a sprint backlog, we would see that the team members are flowing within an iteration. What we have with this life cycle is it's just a continuous flow. We don't need an iteration or a recurring time box to be able to provide that type of structure we need when we're new to an Agile way of working. So practices are on their own cadence. We're still going to want to have the equivalent of an iteration demo through our retrospective, as well as taking a look at how well we're doing with respect to our release plan and the other things we would be doing in a review, as well as regularly reflect on how we're doing as a team following our process. We're just going to do those on demand when they're going to add the most value. So this is another one that can be a good starting point for teams new to DA, but it is a more advanced life cycle. And again, without having a regularly recurring time box, we find that we do need oftentimes a little more experience to be able to effectively follow this. So in this case, based on the context, it was a good starting point for the team, and we did choose the Agile lifecycle. Provides structure, provides practices on regular frequency through our iterations, high visibility if the team is actually taking an Agile way of working. We're able to actually see that the team is committing to a certain quantity of work that's going onto our iteration backlog, and at the end of the iteration, we're able to see what stories they committed to met the definition of done. So that is also something that provides a bit of visibility into how good our way of working really is going. So oftentimes I say, great, I get it. Team chooses a life cycle as their approach. Yes, we make an initial selection out of the available options, but it's really important to understand with Disciplined Agile, they don't have to live with that choice forever. And I'm going to use the example I've been building up now to kind of take you through what happened in this particular project, and then what we did from a next step perspective and how we actually changed our life cycle. So again, we're going to have inception, construction, transition, and how things unfolded. I'm going to use one of these features, again, one of these really big epics that we're going to have to break down into multiple stories. Again, this should be pretty straightforward for most people to understand. Right, as a customer, I want to select a product so I can purchase it. Here's a number of the stories that we came up with, right? We're going to search for a product. We're going to select the product from the search results. We're going to review the product. We're going to potentially look at other similar products, and maybe we have some choices we want to make here, and then get to the point where we're able to add this to a shopping cart and check out. So how that unfolded is we're going to do a little bit of work in inception. We're going to at least identify these stories, which takes very minimal time. We're not going to spend too much time getting into the discussion of them. We're not going to get into a lot of time for the heavy lifting of getting into acceptance criteria during inception, because we're going to wait until we can get the product owner to make an initial prioritization. And again, just like Scrum, we're going to have maybe 2 to 3 time boxes worth of those top prioritized and top sequence stories in our backlog that we are going to make the investment from a time perspective to go through the additional discussion that the team needs with the product owner, as well as any potential subject matter experts coming from the business, as well as for that acceptance criteria to be crafted, and for those top ranked stories to meet a definition of ready, so that the team members have a high level of confidence when they're going through their next iteration planning event. The stories they select, they're going to have good confidence that they understand what they're committing to. So what does it look like? We're going to get into construction. We're going to have the team implement a story. So as a customer, I want to search for a product to make a purchase. And here is some of the acceptance criteria that the product owner and some of the subject matter experts that were supporting them came up with. They were almost trying to replicate what you would find with a very sophisticated search engine like Google, which was well beyond what was needed for a minimum or sufficient functionality for this first release. So we reduced the acceptance criteria down to something that was very simple, like text search and predictive autocomplete. So this plus all the other stories that were needed based on the product owner's determination to hit our sufficient functionality. So throughout the rest of construction, we're going to tackle the harder, more challenging stories and the highest value stories earlier in the construction phase. We're going to achieve that first lightweight milestone based on proving our architecture, and we're going to get to the end of the phase where the product owner is comfortable that enough functionality for all of those higher level, those feature level requirements or epics have been met, and we're going to be able to now move into transition to deploy into our production environment. But here's the other thing. What about the stories that weren't implemented as part of this minimum, or some of the things that came up in acceptance criteria that was beyond the scope of the minimum that now has become a story that the product owner would like to potentially do in the future? So what we have in this case is a number of stories that were identified that were beyond the minimum, but the product owner wanted to be able to do in a very short time period. So we take a look now at what are the options we have to implement these and how best to approach that. So the team in this case were quite good at their adoption of the Agile lifecycle and just in general an Agile way of working. So what we decided to do is experiment with the lean lifecycle. We're going to implement these additional stories that the product owners prioritize very high, and we're going to do it in a short period of time. So we used the lean lifecycle in this context for approximately a 6-week project lifecycle. We had a very short inception phase because it was just a collection of stories. There was not a lot of risk. There wasn't anything new or novel that was going to impact the existing architecture that we initially put together for this portal. We wanted to see if the team could be able to flow work without using iterations and then go through a very short transition period once we had that sufficient functionality again. And what this ties into and what this is part of a differentiator with DA comes down to some of the principles of DA, and there are 8 of them. And it's these 2 that are really focal points for us. Context counts and choice is good. So the context of our team, the size of the team, maybe the geographic distribution of our team, the type of compliance our product needs to be in alignment with, technical complexity, domain complexity. Are the team members new? Have they worked together before? Do we have some people that have experience with an Agile way of working, and maybe that's good experience, or maybe it's experience that is less than what we'd consider an Agile way of working? All those things are factored into the context of some of the decisions we can make both in our life cycles, as well as the choices we're going to be able to make with the practices we're going to use, which is one of the next things that I'll show after a role called the architect owner. So another differentiator that we have is we've got a role called the architect owner in Disciplined Agile. So we have primary roles, again, very similar to a Scrum team. We've got a team lead, which is similar, not exactly the same, but similar to what a Scrum Master would do. Agile process expert, keeps the team focused on achievement of goals, removes impediments. We have a product owner, owns the product vision, scope, and priorities of the solution. Again, very similar to what we would see in Scrum. But one of the differentiator roles is the architect owner. This is an explicit role for somebody that owns the architecture decisions and technical priorities and mitigates key technical risks for the product as a team member. So this isn't an external, like an enterprise architect or somebody from enterprise architecture and other supporting services type of area that would be interacting with the team or teams that are supporting a product. This is somebody making these localized, very tactical decisions from a technical perspective, very similar to a product owner, but focused on technology. Then we have our team members. Again, this is like the development team members that are within Scrum, cross-functional. We want whole team, meaning as best we can, we've got the skills and experience needed to support the product and the scope of work that we are agreeing to do. And then we have our stakeholders. It includes our customers, but it's all the other potential stakeholders in the organization, subject matter experts, people in operations, support staff, architecture, maybe the security and privacy group, and so forth. So the big difference with this architect owner role is that it needs to be filled by the senior developer or your senior technical person that would be on your team. And it is an explicit role to guide the team through architecture and design decisions. So identifies technical stories, sometimes called spikes, or within SAFe, they're called enabler stories. Lots of different ways that we could call these, but these are the more technically focused stories that we put on our backlog. Works closely with enterprise architects, needs to really collaborate quite tightly with the product owner and on technical stakeholder needs. Focuses on minimizing technical debts, right? We want to avoid taking on technical debt, but if we have technical debt in our product, we want a strategy for being able to pay that down. Understands existing enterprise assets. We want to be aligning with standards, as well as has the final say regarding technical decisions. So again, it doesn't mean that it's a free-for-all and we can have somebody in this architect owner role just making selections on anything they want to do, because they need to understand existing enterprise assets and alignment with them. But very similar to a product owner, where the product owner is empowered to make decisions on behalf of the business with respect to the functionality in that product, the architect owner is going to be able to do that within certain parameters from a technical perspective. But here's something else that's unique about how this role is crafted. So we have our architect owner role and we have our team members. And although the architect owner is a role, it's not a titled position, what we need to be able to see is that they're also a team member. So we have a couple of different types of scenarios. I'm going to cover two that are sort of at opposite ends of the spectrum. So we might have a scope of work that has significant technical risk. Maybe we're replatforming a legacy product onto a new technology stack. Maybe we're going to be interfacing with a new product or something else within a value stream we haven't done before, and there's a lot of risk, a lot of things we have to figure out because it is new and novel. Maybe 75% of the capacity of the person playing the architect owner role is focused on the responsibilities that that role has. The remainder of the time is a doer of work as a team member. They're pulling work or supporting things like pairing or some of the other practices with the other team members. Now, if we have minimal technical risk, it might be something like 10% of their capacity for the responsibility of the architect owner. The remaining 90%, they are focused on just being a team member and pulling work that needs to get done to achieve the goal of the iteration, as well as the goal of the project that they're working on. What really changes with this role is that we're bringing a third role into the mix of the named roles, and that really changes the dynamics we see on projects, on teams supporting a product. So the product owner is going to be focused on building the right product, the right functionality. We're getting validated learnings from our stakeholders as quickly as we can, so we can make timely decisions so that when we get done with meeting that sufficient functionality, we're able to put that functionality in the hands of our users and get feedback and see how they're using it to make more and more informed decisions. The architect owner is focused on building the product right. We want to make sure we've got good development standards. We want to make sure we are focused on paying down technical debt or not taking on technical debt as best we can. And the team lead, our Agile team level process expert, wants to deliver the product sooner, right? We're using Agile and Lean principles to be able to do that. And the intersection of all three roles and sort of in this Venn diagram, we'd want to see a larger and larger coverage over time. That's one of the benefits of bringing an additional role into this mix. We should see a high level of collaboration between the product owner and architect owner. And we also should see some healthy tension, right? If we're not seeing that, then we're not seeing that the architect owner in their quest to build the product right, being balanced with building the right product through the eyes of the product owner role. So another differentiator I'm going to cover, and then I would like to see what we might do from a Q&A perspective. Differentiator number 3 is process goals. And this is another very significant thing from a DA perspective, and why additional learning and additional awareness can provide a significant benefit to you. So Disciplined Agile uses a goal-driven approach. So what if you have a team and the members don't have experience with using an Agile way of working? So again, the Scrum is easy to adopt because the Scrum Guide is pretty lightweight. It's pretty small. But if you need additional guidance, yes, you can take Scrum training or you can get an experienced Scrum Master. But beyond what's in the Scrum Guide, it might become a struggle. I mean, what if you've got a team level coach that has enough experience to really support the needs? We don't always see that this is there. We don't always see sometimes the person in that Scrum Master role and the person in that team level coaching role has some of the adequate experience to really get the team mobilized in a good way of working with respect to Agile. What if you have team level coaches that do have that experience, but because they come at a little bit higher cost, they're spread too thin, right? So yes, you have somebody, but it's really hard getting some of their time. They're not supporting you anywhere near the level that would be required to be very timely for you to continue to move in a really positive direction. One of the more challenging things is what happens if you have team members that think they have good Agile experience, but they really don't, right? And they look at some of the practices or ways of working we can adopt, but don't understand some of the trade-offs. And even maybe more detrimental is they have sort of a misunderstanding of what some of these things are intended to do. What if you have team level coaches that you think have good Agile experience, but they don't? This is one of the most unfortunate experiences when I do some of the agility health check assessments for organizations, where I come in and it's very clear that they have people in these coaching positions that really don't have experience that indicates that they have been a team member using Agile, let alone having enough experience to then be coaching others to do that. So what DA has is something called guided continuous improvement. And one of the foundational aspects of that is called these process goals. So if you think back to one of the slides I started off with, hundreds of practices that you could go out and find by just doing a Google search on Agile principles, Agile practices, Agile techniques. So what DA has is it's got containers of information that are arranged in what are called process goals. And we have decision points for the team members to consider and a number of options that they can choose from. And we have process goals that are arranged with the inception phase, because there's some of the things that we'd be doing very early in our adoption of an Agile way of working, and very early when we're getting ready to start working on the next larger quantity of scope we're going to do. Things like form team, plan the release, develop our test strategy. As we move into the construction phase, we have additional process goals, things like proving architecture early. And then we have them for transition. And then just some of these process goals that are just going to be constantly ongoing. How do we address risk? How do we evolve our way of working? How do we continue to grow our team members so they really become more cross-functional, and we do get closer and closer to that sort of whole team goal that we would like to see? So some of the DA principles here, again, context counts, because we're going to be able to make some choices. And another one is pragmatism, right? We want to be able to be very pragmatic in the choices we're making. We don't want to choose some of the things that in reality we're just not going to be able to do. Maybe there's some significant impediments, or the culture of the organization isn't ready for us to do that. So there's a nice balance that we're trying to achieve with all of this. So the goal-driven approach, how it works. We have all these process goals. There are 21 of them at what we consider the team level. So a pretty good amount, but by no means an overwhelming amount. So these are the ones that are representative of what we would be looking to make some decisions on when we get into the inception phase, right? Forming the team, aligning with enterprise direction, exploring scope. So from an explore scope perspective, we have a number of decision points. What's the level of detail that's appropriate for us to document? Again, we want to do our documentation as lightweight as we can without introducing unnecessary risk. So there are a number of options we can take a look at for the level of detail. How are we going to explore usage? How are we going to explore the domain? Choosing a work item management strategy. So I'll choose a work item management strategy as an example here. We could have a work item pool, we could have a task board, work item list, we could have a product backlog, or unmanaged, right? So this is an example of just options we can choose from. Another set of options would be for explore usage, right? Maybe we're going to use epics, we're going to use user stories, and we're going to do user story mapping. We're going to identify themes, whether we're going to be able to do a query and see all of the stories that are related to implement an epic or implement something higher like a feature. Maybe what we're going to do is be able to see all the stories that were related to a particular type of customer for a particular resource or capability area. Again, it's just a way to be able to see all of the stories for a particular purpose. So in our option list, we have some default options. Some of the ones that are bolded here, those are for small teams with relatively straightforward context. It's a really good starting point. If there's an arrow, like the one that we've got for choose a work item management strategy, it means that towards the top of that list, we would normally see better and better results based on all of the project teams that have used Disciplined Agile, as well as all of the project teams that have used just these practices. And what we see as some of the better techniques, it's an ordered list. So one of the things that Disciplined Agile has is context counts, right? This is one of our principles. So although we have a really good list of options in Disciplined Agile, we can, in the context of our product or our organization, look for things that might be of good value to us. So it's not an exhaustive list. And it also shouldn't be seen as something that is just carved into stone, something that we can no longer add something to, or even potentially take something out. There are some options that might not be suitable for our organization based on the line of products we have, what type of compliance issues we might have to fall underneath, and so forth. So what we can do is, if we want to use something like a feature, we can add that in as an option so that our team, other teams supporting the same product, or teams supporting other products in the organization also might get a benefit from that. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment, and let's take a look at, are there any questions that I can answer at this juncture? Or Ahmad, is there anything you would like to interject?
Yeah, actually, we have got some questions. Some of those were already answered during the session we were having. So
I see them now. Yeah.
yeah, so let me put the others forward. For example, Naeem Iqbal asks that is DA more suitable for some industries, or it can be applied across all?
Yeah, so this can be applied across just like any good Agile way of working, you can apply it to any industry. And I want to say that although Disciplined Agile's origins were, again, like most Agile ways of working, founded in software development, we do have additional life cycles that have been added for non-software development, because we've got those of us that have been supporting companies that have been using DA for some time. There's a lot of non-software development work that's been done using DA. So it's very agnostic and can add value.
Okay, so the next question that came from is Numan. He again, this is tying into the previous question.
Yep.
We have seen that data science and machine learning products, we might face difficulty when we try to fit them into the Scrum frameworks, where you have to deliver something every second sprint or every sprint. And maybe this is something that you have already answered, but let's.
Yeah, so exploratory projects or areas of innovation. So one of the things that we see teams use quite a bit is our exploratory life cycle. It is for looking at ideas and testing hypotheses. And what we can also see sometimes is that although that's a very small, lightweight life cycle, We can also tailor that life cycle more specifically to meet the needs of some of these types of areas amongst others. So yes, there is good utilization. And again, because we've got choices and we don't just have one way of doing it.
And also, when I was in the classes you guys were teaching, and actually, guys, I took classes from Joshua's institute. Glenn Little was there. So one of the things that they taught us was that we can tailor things to our needs as well, because this is the
Absolutely.
important aspect. We have to choose our own way of working.
Yes. Yeah. So where I showed on that one of those last slides where, there was a feature that was added into the options in a decision point in a process school, you can change Discipline Agile without sort of violate. There's no Discipline Agile authorities that are going to come say you're not doing it right, to meet the needs in the context. And you can look at some of the other ways in Discipline Agile and meld them together so that a life cycle, the responsibilities of a role, again, we want to be careful with some of these tailorings, as well as what we see in these process goals, really can add the most value to you.
Yeah, and I think we already touched upon this question. You explained the architecture role very profoundly in your session. I think there are some other roles as well, which are not primary roles that
Yes.
come to mind.
Yes. So what we have is we have the primary roles that I covered, and we have a process goal that's called form team, but we also have supporting roles. So we realize that there are it's rare you're going to have a whole team. So you normally are going to need to be able to pull on other experienced resources, whether that's a little bit of guidance or they might join you for a few iterations. So we have multiple other roles in the supporting area, but then we also have roles that we typically are going to see at a greater scale. So if we're going to have teams of teams, we're going to have additional roles. We might have a chief architect owner, chief product owner. We might have a product manager, and on and on. There is a really good list of descriptions as examples of what you might find when you need to form your team.
And another question that I think this whole session is about this question, and I think your slide, which was discussing the plateau that we reach once we are very efficient with our Scrum framework, I think that answers this. This
It
question.
does, but I do want to add one last thing because it's a very interesting point in time that we're currently at. So there is content and guidance that is proprietary to DA because it's been authored by the thought leadership of Discipline Agile. But Discipline Agile uses and leverages what's working well. So you can see we've heavily leveraged Scrum, Scaled Agile Framework, Large Scale Scrum, but also other things like the Agile modeling body of knowledge. We also have things that are coming from extreme programming. A lot of the technical practices you'll find in DA go back to extreme programming, the rational unified process and the open unified process. And I like to bring those about very quickly because Scott Ambler, one of the co-creators of Discipline Agile, has written more books on RUP than any other person in the history of the rational unified process. And Dean Leffingwell, who is the creator of the Scaled Agile framework, had a company called Requisite that Rational purchased. And when IBM purchased Rational, Dean was the head of the RUP University for a long period of time before he left to create SAFe. And the current product owner and CEO of Scrum.org is Dave Weft, who was one of the product managers of the Rational Unified Process. So there is a lot of similarities and a lot of shared learning that DA has embodied. And that's one of the reasons why it was invented. That also with agility at scale, which is something that IBM had at the time that they purchased DA.
Yeah, and I think these were the questions that came into us, and again, your session has been quite informative, and I think this can help us tie into why we need it, and then again, it is not something that can be covered in half an hour or 1 hour session.
No, unfortunately, it is not.
And definitely, we have to go back and look at it and understand it. And just like any other thing, you can't just make sure that it's there. You just can give a little drop of it, you can taste it, and then you have to take the whole bite later on.
Yes. Yeah, which you did, right? I mean, you invested in upskilling yourself with respect to learning more about Discipline Agile and taking some of the certification workshops.
Yeah, and guys, I want to add one more thing. Being someone who has already done Scrum at scale and who has actually implemented Scrum of Scrums as well, and has been again understanding what DA stands for. At the end of the day, it is just what you feel and how you feel like it and how you want your process to run. And what DA gives you is the toolkit that how you can manage your stuff.
Yeah, lots of options.
Yeah. So, so, so what next? So we have this session. We understand, but there is a need for DA. So, what we do next?
So there's a few things you can do to continue your learning journey. There are webinars that you can attend. I mean, similar to this one, but there are some that come from the Disciplined Agile Consortium. We at Process Ventures, we have a weekly 30-minute webinar that we typically bring in a very experienced guest, and we talk about a topic that we normally find is pretty meaningful. There are a number of workshops that are based on getting you to a level of certification that PMI has. There are books I will hold up in front of my camera. So this is the Choose Your Wild book. This is a reference book. This isn't something you would just pick up and read over the course of a weekend. So there's very good content in this. So there is a lot of information that you can start looking at to begin, investing and figuring out how Disciplined Agile can help you, help your team, help a customer you're working for.
Yeah, and again, behind the scenes, if you look at behind the scenes, there are more things are coming in as well.
Yes, there are a lot. So one of the things that is really great about PMI's investment in DA is there are multiple certification paths. So not everybody wants to be a team lead, a team level coach. So there is a professional level of certification at the practitioner level and additional specialized certifications like being a certified architect owner. If your path is going to lead you down becoming an architect, that is one of your options, or becoming a certified product owner. So there are a lot of things that are coming. There is a lot of focus around value stream management. So there are new workshops, new content in the body of knowledge that's coming. A lot of that is being led by Al Shalloway, who built most of the lean content that's in SAFe. So it's quite exciting future.
Yeah, and again, guys, you can join on the LinkedIn of DA as well. For Pakistani audience, you can stay with AgilePK as well. What we can do is we are going to bring all the stuff in. We will try to translate into our own language as well. I'm Joshua. With your approval, I am going to talk in Urdu for a couple of minutes.
Of course.
Yeah. सो गाइज हमारा प्लान ये है कि हम लोग अब इस तरह के वेबिनार्स करते रहेंगे आउट ऑफ द बॉक्स विद एबी के अंडर एजाइल पीके अम्ब्रेला. हम क्या करेंगे कि डिफरेंट चीज़ों को लेके आएंगे, कोशिश करेंगे हम लोग अपनी डिस्कशन के मुताबिक कर सकें. उन चीज़ों को जो बेनिफिट है वो हम अपनी आवाम को दे सकें. और अगेन जैसे कि जोशुआ ने बताया कि यू हैव टू अंडरस्टैंड योर ओन, यू हैव टू चूज़ योर ओन वे ऑफ वर्किंग. और यही डिसिप्लिन एजाइल का बेनिफिट जो है हम उर्दू कोशिश करेंगे अपनी ज़बान के अंदर हम इसको डिस्कस करें ताकि वी हैव मोर कवरेज, हम इसको मोर ज़्यादा लोगों तक लेके जा सकें. सो जोशुआ, थैंक यू फॉर गिविंग योर टाइम.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for having me and being able to raise the awareness of DA in your community.
And thank you guys for tuning in. If you have any other questions, please drop them in. Me, Suhail, Khalid, we and a couple of other guys have already done DA from PMI. What we can do is we can try to share our knowledge, and if we need be, we can ask the other seniors like Joshua to come and help us out as well.
Of course.
So thank you very much, man.
Absolutely, anytime.
It's always a pleasure to hear you.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.